welcome everybody to another episode of Sunday School Dropouts podcast. We are so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah.
Really excited about our guest today, and what we're going to be talking about. Now, before we jump into that, though, we do have a couple of announcements. We still have some groups that have availability for folks to sign up if they would like to. One of those groups is being led by myself. It's
Yay!
basically Seventh-day Adventist support group for folks who have left, are deconstructing, or in the process of leaving. Anybody who has baggage related to Adventism, essentially. So if that might be you or someone you know, I'd love to hear from you. And what's the other group that we have that starts tomorrow, I believe?
Yeah. So if you're listening to this episode the day that we drop it, you still have time to sign up, probably all the way up to maybe a little bit before the group starts on Wednesday, September 25th. But that is a purity culture support group for women and those identifying as female, socialized as female, growing up inside of high control religion. That's led by one of our practitioners, Casey Bain. She usually runs this group every fall, and it's really, really wonderful because, as we know, purity culture is something that really impacts people far after having left it. So it's a wonderful chance to be with other people who have maybe experienced similar things, similar impacts, and heal together. And I think that's the point of all of our support groups, is that it is a chance to know you're not alone, and there's other people that are going through this with you. And when I've led support groups in the past, I feel like I, even as the practitioner, have healed in ways as well that group support. And so I really would encourage anybody, if you're interested in that group or Andrew's group, go to traumaresolutionandrecovery.com. Under our services tab, there's a support group link, and you can go ahead and register for an inquiry call. They'll get back to you, tell you all the details of the group, and you can join. So make sure to do that.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, back to our guest for today.
Yes.
Jeremy Lehmann.
Yes.
I'm so excited to be able to talk with Jeremy today, talking about the nervous system, talking about trauma, high control religions, just the intersectionality of all of those things and how that shows up.
Mm-hmm.
What are you excited about, Laura?
Yeah, I am too. I really like these touchstone episodes that we're doing, kind of like always just like revisiting the foundation, kind of the basics. I think that's something that pulls our podcast kind of apart from sets our podcast apart from others, in the sense that we really are interested in the healing part and using our knowledge and academic and backgrounds and experiences to be able to offer people some really tangible ways to do that. And I think one of the things I'm excited about is that in this conversation, there's not only great information, but Jeremy leaves us with some ways that we can even start engaging with the nervous system and to develop that sense of what we're calling internal safety. And so I'm just really hopeful that people will be able to learn a lot, but also take that and start implementing it into their lives in a way that feels meaningful to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm definitely excited about it. And as always, everyone, just a quick disclaimer. We recognize that some of the topics we discuss in any episode may bring up feelings, emotions, and triggers that may require more processing or be too much to handle right now. Please always feel free to skip any episode or parts of episodes and come back if and when you're ready. Our goal is to help you trust your own body and lived experience. Mm-hmm. So take what you need and leave what you don't.
All right, Andrew, I think we should have our first vocabulary lesson of season 2. And this term is, I think, pretty applicable to today and what we're going to be talking about. But the term that we're talking about is trauma response. So, let's talk about what is a trauma response.
Oh, trauma response. Yeah, that is such a buzzword now. I see it everywhere. Like, I can't, my TikTok for you page or that thread or algorithm is like full of those stuff about trauma, and this comes up a lot. I'll actually start by saying I kind of prefer the term nervous system response.
I do
first
too.
And foremost, because and we can get more into the nuance of that, but the thing is like our nervous system responds to a lot of things, and it's not always they're not always stress related,
right?
And
Yeah.
we'll talk about some of we've talked about some of this
Hmm.
in our other conversation, but not to get ahead of myself. But it's that's actually where I would start. And everything that social media influencer culture is calling a trauma response or is is not, I would say, is not actually necessarily a trauma response. But I'll stop talking there. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about this term and how it's kind of taken off lately?
Yeah, I really prefer the term nervous system response as well because it literally is just the way our nervous system is responding to external stimuli and, things that are happening in us and around us. I saw a meme one day, they're like, yawning is a trauma response. And I'm like, is it? Or if we look at if yawning is a nervous system response, yeah, absolutely it is. It's a parasympathetic nervous system response. That does not mean that you're traumatized. It doesn't mean that you're triggered. It means that your nervous system is doing something. In fact, your parasympathetic nervous system is engaged in a way
Mm,
that's getting more air from into the brain and all that fun stuff. We don't have to go too much into it. But I do like the
yeah.
term nervous system response because I think it more aptly describes what is happening. Our nervous system is responding. And trauma response, I think a lot of people assume then if I'm in an activated state like fight, flight, or freeze, that must mean that I have trauma. And so I'm having a trauma response to it. When in reality, our nervous system is built to move in and out of those nervous system states all day long, and they're not connected to trauma. In fact, that's just like one teeny tiny part of our nervous system is to engage in things like fight, flight, freeze, fawn. But we also engage in those fight, flight, freeze, fawn for other reasons. I think about like our sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for our fight and flight. Well, we engage with that when we're playing sports, when we're in competition, when we're excited, when we're exercising, things that are what we would probably consider pretty healthy and good responses to have. Our sympathetic nervous system is activated, but we're not having a trauma response. But if we just keep that word trauma response, then one would suggest, like, oh my gosh, my heart is racing and my cheeks are red and I want to run really fast. That then means like trauma? Nah, not
Yeah.
necessarily, but it does mean that your nervous system is operating how it needs to be.
Right. I think that's the important piece is just recognizing like sometimes what people are calling a trauma response is actually your nervous system doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And the ability to go into that state, come out of that state as needed, go back into that state as needed. It's flexible. It's flexible. And so trauma is that's discussing, that's referring to something different. It's when there's been too much,
Hmm.
your body's not able to like return to a state of regulation, for example. But yeah, going into your fight or flight and then coming out of it after like that is not a trauma response in the sense of what people mean when they're using that phrase, I think. And so, yeah, it's, it's subtle, but I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah. And so it might be better that, even to suggest that, like, some people say, like, okay, well, oversharing is a trauma response. Well, not necessarily. But we might use oversharing, might be connected to the fawn response, which is part of our nervous system response. And so
Mhm.
perhaps it's more of like a symptom of an activated nervous system or a symptom of a nervous system that's in the space of fawn. But it's not necessarily connected always to trauma, though it can be. And I know social media doesn't always leave us room for nuance. However, I think that's why it's so important to have conversations like this where we can be more nuanced to go, yeah, like I get it. It's quippy for like a little meme that you make, but that also can be really misleading.
Yeah.
And and it can lead people to believe that they either have a lot of trauma when they don't, or that their life is one walking trigger and
Yeah.
responding to that. And in reality, that can make somebody feel very powerless and very helpless. And the hope would be that expanding that term for what it is actually can feel more empowering to understand what's happening in your body and nervous system and what you need for extra support.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, yeah, that's helpful. That's very helpful because
Yeah. Yeah.
I always like being able to touch on some of the words that I'm seeing. And when I say buzzwords, I don't mean it dismissively, but
Hmm.
it's just in pop culture. Like I see what's trending, and that is definitely one of the things that's coming up a lot. And so I think it's important to have these conversations around definitions and words and what what people mean when they say them, and then what clinically does this actually mean? What does it actually look like?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I love it. All right. So that's a trauma response.
Yes.
We are excited to be joined today by a fellow practitioner at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, Jeremy Lehmann. Jeremy is a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Tennessee, a trauma coach, and a somatic experiencing practitioner. His work at CTRR focuses on religious trauma and the unique impacts on the LGBTQ plus community and increasing body and sexuality awareness through somatic work. Jeremy grew up as a gay man who was raised in high control Christianity and believes that developing a relationship with his body is one of the most essential components of his healing and ongoing growth. His core messages for the people that he works with and our listeners today is that you make sense and you are not broken. You can find out more about Jeremy at his website, thrivery.com, or on the CTRR website.
Welcome, Jeremy, to the Sunday School Dropouts podcast. It is so good to have you back.
Thanks so much for having me again.
Yeah. I was just thinking, this is actually the third episode we've done with you.
Is that the third?
Yeah, because we did one about the unique parts growing up LGBTQ within like high control religion. And then you and Jessica came on and did a practice session.
That's right.
So you have officially, at least as of today, you have been on the podcast the most. Now, we're going to be interviewing somebody next week who will match you. But at least for this, this time, such a moment as this.
Very exciting. It's almost like I have tenure or something.
You are. We will call you Professor Jeremy. So Professor Jeremy is a fitting term for today, since we're having a little bit more of a clinical or academic conversation around the nervous system, religious trauma, healing the nervous system, all those fun things. So we're excited to have you here.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. So let's start off with an easy one. Okay. Yes. What is the nervous system, and what functions does it serve?
Sure. So kind of starting big and going small, central nervous system is like the brain and the spinal cord. And smaller part of that, the peripheral nervous system, is like the nerves that branch off from the spinal cord and extend into the other parts of the body. And then kind of the subset that, as a therapist and a practitioner, that I tend to work with more is the autonomic nervous system. And this part of the peripheral nervous system is responsible for like the regulation of like involuntary physiological processes, including like heart rate, respiration, which is now up because I was like fussing with my dog, digestion, sexual arousal. And these processes operate out of awareness. Like, we don't really have control over them. When we eat, our bodies just does the things it does to move through food through our digestive tract, extract nutrients, metabolize. That this stuff just happens. So that's one of the pieces there. This part of the nervous system is also responsible for like survival responses like fight, flight, freeze, mobilizing us for action or shutting us down when threat field is kind of too big to actually escape from. And then there's the social engagement part of the nervous system too, that helps us slow down to be able to like regulate and to be in connection and to experience and take in safety. This part of our nervous system is both sensing into the environment and also sending messages up to our brain. And so, that's kind of a quick overview of the nervous system, and especially the part of the nervous system that we pay attention to. So.
Yeah. So this is for people would be that autonomic nervous system is where we're talking about like sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, and then the ventral vagal parts complex.
of it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because I know people hear that a lot in trauma therapy, trauma coaching, sympathetic nervous system. That's what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So on that note, how does trauma show up in the nervous system? From a nervous system perspective, how would you describe that?
Yeah. So trauma isn't about the specifics of what happened. And like the ways that we talk about trauma, like colloquially, are super
Mm-hmm.
make trauma more confusing in some ways. Like, we didn't get a traumatic haircut, or we didn't get, a meeting isn't
Yeah.
usually traumatic. Um, like those kinds of events we metabolize and we move through pretty quickly. They don't
Mm.
have like lingering, lasting impact. Trauma is much more about like the residual imprint that gets left on the nervous system from experiences that were too much to metabolize.
Mm.
So, one of the ways that, like in somatic experiencing, we kind of talk about this is like too much, too fast, too soon.
Mhm.
But it's also like the like too little, too late kinds of
Mm.
trauma, and we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about the difference between PTSD and like complex and developmental kinds of trauma. Um, so it's not just like impact of events, but it's also impact of like environments and relationships as well.
Mm. Mhm.
Mm.
And that nervous system imprint can compromise our ability to accurately assess for and take in safety when that's available.
Mm.
Keeps us stuck in survival mode and scanning for threat when threat's not actually present.
Mhm.
It can also like have the effect of um, dampening or our survival responses that need to mobilize,
Mm.
so that we're not able to keep ourselves safe or protect ourselves when we need to be able to, because that's been so kind of conditioned to
Mhm.
stay in a sort of chronic shutdown state.
Mhm. Yeah. We just did an episode. The first episode of our season was talking about what is religious trauma,
Mhm.
and so we've used that definition. It's anything that's too much, too fast, too soon, or it's happened for too long, overwhelms our ability to cope and come back to a place of safety.
Mm.
And we're talking about the nervous system in that our
Yeah.
nervous system is experiencing something is too much, too fast, too soon, or for too long that overwhelms us. Um, so when we think about religious trauma in specific, how does the nervous system, how does religious trauma and the nervous system go together?
Yeah. So I think that our religious and spiritual environments there are components of all of those kinds of trauma. So there are very
Mm.
specific kind of event-based or incident-based kinds of trauma where we experienced kind of we experience something very specific.
Hmm.
Um, the kinds of like, public shamings or whatever it is that happens kind of as an event. But there's also the way that the environment itself sort of creates the conditions for our nervous system to be kind of chronically activated,
Mm.
stuck in survival mode, and also out of touch with our bodies as well.
Mm.
So there's the event kinds of trauma that happen there, there's the relational kinds of trauma that happen there, and there's the systemic and environmental kinds of trauma that
Hmm.
all show up in this place,
Hmm.
in those spaces. And also like the thinking about the things that happened that didn't happen but should have, like our
Hmm.
connection with our bodies that kind of gets actively underdeveloped and actively
Hmm.
neglected. And so sometimes when we're looking back, well, there's nothing to look at. I mean, nothing happened, but that's sort of the point, that when we look back, there are places in our lives that really should have been populated with important experience that we didn't have. And so sometimes that's even the one that's especially tricky to work with, because when we look back, well, there was nothing there.
Hmm.
And often there's like not this recognition of, oh, but something should have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Could you give an example of that? Just so if people are like, well, what are you talking about when you
Yeah.
say
Oh,
the thing that should have been there?
yeah. One of the things that especially, and this is really one of my areas that I talk about a lot, is when it comes to sexuality.
Mm,
If any other aspect of our humanity was treated with the kind of inattention that our sexuality is across the lifespan, we would rightly call this neglect. But
mm,
we grow up in these environments where we get very, very minimal education and guidance around just navigating our own bodies. We don't get
mhm.
accurate names for anatomy. We're really like we have these blank spots in our body, like or stupid pet names that really aren't that
Yeah.
communicate something about this is a thing we can't talk about. And
Mm,
so when like developmentally, it's not sexualizing children to give them proper anatomy names. And so, but we
mm,
don't have ways of thinking well about what is developmentally appropriate sex ed across the lifespan. We wait till, right around puberty to give, the talk that is a really short, like, here's very minimal information and here's the list of rules you have to follow about doing this well. And then it's very hands off and like fingers crossed. We hope that nobody, makes all the wrong decisions.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's I think that neglect, not just in church, but like culturally, we have
Mhm.
um a very disintegrated relationship with sexuality because of
Mhm.
Yeah.
all of the feelings and shame and all of that other stuff that kind of aggregates there.
Yeah.
Mm.
I was just
Yeah.
going to mention that the piece with shame, like how much that I see that come up so much with folks I work with, and also just anecdotally from my own life, like
Mhm.
shame around sexuality.
Oh God, yeah.
Um, and then like the talk, for example, it's
Mhm.
like the fact that it's not something that's able to be freely, in a developmentally appropriate way, but is not freely talked about until the talk,
Mhm.
if that
Yeah.
even happens.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
I,
And
I thankfully missed this resource, but I've had several folks tell me lately that I guess there was some James Dobson resource on human sexuality that a lot of folks in my generation were just handed, not no guidance, just handed a James Dobson resource about their, at puberty, or teen in
Preparing
their
for
teenage.
Adolescence. That's the book.
Oh
Preparing for
Is
God.
that
Adolescence.
Yeah.
it?
Yes. That was the
Yeah.
book I
Okay.
was handed.
That sounds right. Oh
Uh,
We
God.
were we were
Here
talking
we
about
go.
this, wasn't it? Didn't we talk about this, Jeremy? I
Probably.
think in our quote unquote satellite office. I feel like we had for those
Probably. Yeah.
Jeremy and I's satellite office is a Mexican restaurant where we, figure out all the things. But
Oh
yeah, I
man.
think we were talking about that preparing for
Well,
adolescence.
it really
Yeah.
sounds like being given. I mean, I grew up in Adventism, which is
Oh,
Mhm.
conservative as I'll get out, but
sure.
insulated in itself. So we didn't. I knew James Dobson, but we didn't do a lot of his resources. That being
Yeah.
said, being given this book honestly is sounding more and more like a canon event for a lot of purity culture kids. You know.
Well, and also like that just the learning that happens around like the implicit learning that happens there. We learn by what we don't talk about that this is a thing that can't be talked about.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
so like there's
Mhm.
this whole aspect of my own humanity that relationship was underdeveloped and actively so until
Mhm.
I started, until later adulthood when I had to like, do the work on my own to reintegrate that back into the whole.
Mm.
But we're also
Yeah.
drifting away from some of the more nervous system specific stuff into the
No, it's
sexuality
okay.
101 conversation. But yeah, so this is one of the ways that like what should have happened but didn't happen. This
Mhm.
is one of the ways that I think that we see this especially showing up.
Mhm. Mhm.
And just even our relationship with our bodies in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That there's so much mistrust and that gets that we learn in this environment that keeps
Yeah.
us out of relationship and out of connection with our full selves.
Well, and I think too, even to the point of what we're talking about with sexuality, like, things that shouldn't that didn't happen, conversations about consent, safer sex,
Yeah.
how to connect to your body for desire, how to say no, to know what I even want or don't want, all of which then can lead to us overriding our nervous system and it resulting in that overwhelm, that too muchness, that too fast, too soon. I think about now, like, being taught you turn off all your sexual desires until this specific moment in this specific context with this specific person, like the light switch, right? So rather than sexual development looking like a dimmer switch that we're slowly turning on, it's off, 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 off until we're on. And then the way that
that's a great analogy. Like, I love that dimmer switch instead of like an on.
I learned it. It was one of the first things I learned working with sex offenders, actually, because I worked with so many juvenile sex offenders who had also been abused or victims of abuse. And so their sexuality was like a light switch being turned from off to on because it was inappropriate for the age and developmental stage that they were at. Whereas we needed to look at it like that dimmer switch where it's always a part of us. And as we grow and develop, it's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And the hope is that when we're ready to then engage in like partnered sex, our body is already prepared for that because we've been developing our sexuality throughout the lifespan. But within high control religion, that oftentimes doesn't happen. And so then we're at the wedding night and this switch is turned from off to on because a magical piece of paper and two magical words of I do have been said. And the body goes, this is too much. This is too fast. It's too soon. I can't, I'm now overwhelmed. My ability to cope and feel safe in this situation is gone. And so I think it's a very apt example to say, like, because of what did not happen with sexuality, that leads to nervous system overwhelm that then, that's why we see people in our offices who have extreme pain during sex, who feel immense guilt and shame, who have really are showing symptoms of sexualized violence and assault, similar to victims who have experienced literal sexual violence and assault. And so, I think it all ties together.
Sure. And the ways that in this place where, as even when this relationship itself is safe, because this
of course
kind of activity has been so coded into our nervous system as danger. My nervous system doesn't automatically catch up with, sex doesn't equal danger.
Right. Yeah. And to your point then too, of like, when we're in that heightened state of activation, not only then am I viewing this situation as dangerous, I'm potentially also viewing this person as dangerous. And so even though in a calm and rational mind, we might be able to say, no, it's definitely not dangerous. Our bodies are acting as if it is true because of everything we've been taught, the way the nervous system has been primed. But I think that's where we then also can overreact towards people, towards situations where we go, we're making decisions now from this place of threat and survival versus realizing this is a result of what happened to me or what didn't happen.
On that note, I'm just curious to hear more. When we're talking certainly about like in the realm of sexuality, how this shows up, but like high control religion in general, just how they function. What would you say are some ways that high control religions promote nervous system dysregulation?
Sure. So thinking about kind of my own experience, there was a lot of fear was one of the primary emotions that looking back as a child that I was very aware of. Like the threat of, being set on fire forever if I got this wrong. Like having that as a chronic, persistent threat that I don't know how well I'm going to be able to escape that or not. And all like we would have like Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames sort of fear, like heavy fear-based things, like the post-rapture movies of the people that that didn't get swept up into the sky and were left behind and all of that other stuff. There was a lot of threat and that threat wasn't visible, but it was there. And so I didn't
Yeah.
like in differently than like I can see if there's, somebody dangerous walking towards me. There was this whole array of like, demons and all of the spiritual warfare stuff that was going on all around me at every single moment of every single day that was inescapable.
Mm,
And so like fear
yeah.
was this kind of chronic um, motivator in that
Yeah.
environment. Shame also being kind of one of the primary motivators, like this, like having, for all of the messaging that we got about grace, it was very much about like having to earn your spot. And at least in the environment that I was raised in, there was a lot of, um, the idea of original sin, like I'm fundamentally bad from the beginning.
Mm,
And and then, like we said, all of like the body distrust. I can't trust what my body is actually communicating with me. And I'm having to override, feelings of fear and anxiety, or I'm having to dismiss, um, really constantly not paying attention to or taking seriously the cues that my body was giving me.
mm.
And so, like, this way of being kept out of communication with my body in a way that made that language really inaccessible.
I wonder, like, because you've hit on this, like the divorcing yourself from your body. I think about that. Maybe it's even a verse in the Bible about like always being on guard. Is there a verse, something like that? Like the devil is kind of always out to get you. Be prepared at every time.
Uh,
I,
I mean, it's
like, we need
that's
like a
probably a
fact
cluster
checker.
of verses, but yes, I know what you're talking about. Um,
Yeah.
well, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah.
And so,
Which,
like, this is
yeah.
like literal actual threat. Stealing,
Yeah.
killing, and destroying are like threat. And so,
Hmm.
the ways that I was always primed to be on alert for threat,
Right.
and this threat not being visible threat. There's also
Yeah.
like I was taught that, the world was dangerous. These people are
Right.
safe and the people out there aren't. And so
Hmm.
I was having to, in that space, convince myself that this was safe, even when safety didn't feel
Hmm.
present.
Hmm.
And I had to convince myself that outside was dangerous,
Right.
even when danger wasn't present.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so like there was a lot of kind of training the nervous system to misfire
Yeah. Yeah.
and be really unable to read and interpret
Hmm.
and think wisely.
Yeah.
Like I was kind of trained to be
Yeah.
reactive instead of thoughtfully responsive.
Sure. When you think about like living living in that constantly, what is the impact that that has over time? Not only like what we're talking about here of, having this threat, this constant or pervasive set of threat, but also then shutting down your body, whether it's the
Mhm.
cues of your body, the desires of your body, even stress signals, right? Of
Yeah.
exhaustion or things like that, labeling them all as,
Yeah.
sinful instead
Yeah.
of, really actually paying attention to what the body's doing. Like, what is the long-term impact of
Well,
that?
in one of my couples trainings, packed, it's Stan
Yeah.
Tatkin's model, and he talks about like relationship stress, and especially like when stress is chronic. The way that he describes this, I think, is really brilliant. Like he describes this as metabolically expensive. Like
Hmm.
when we are kind of chronically activated, our bodies are having to actually burn through resources in a
Hmm.
way that they don't have to when we're safe. And
Yeah.
so resources that could be allocated differently, not like we're, moving these debits and
Yeah.
credits around into the correct columns, but like if I'm in a more regulated nervous system state, especially one that matches the environment that I'm in. Like I'm not talking about regulation as I'm always calm even when the situation doesn't call
Right.
for that. But when I'm here in my house right now, I don't have any there are very minimal stress activators right now. But if I have a nervous system that leans in the direction of chronic stress and I'm kind of heightened anxiety in a heightened anxiety state, even when the environment doesn't require that, I am burning through resources.
Mm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is wear and tear on me as an organism, that isn't productive. Like that energy isn't being used, or it becomes unavailable to use in places where I would like to be able to use it.
I think that's a really good way of
Yeah.
saying it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's so interesting just thinking about, well, how much of those resources, like being like hypervigilant, that takes. And then what you were saying earlier, like there's, because in high control religion, like we were saying, like so much of the threat, it's not even a measurable, perceivable threat. And then also couple that with just this idea, this foundational understanding that like I'm inherently bad. Like if there's a problem, it's somehow on me and I need to figure out how to fix it. Like, you know, whether that be praying or giving it to God, whatever that means, or, you know, fill in the blank with all the other jargon. Yeah. Oh, and I did look up that verse, Laura.
Yeah.
I knew the one. I couldn't remember where it was. It's in First Peter. It's First Peter chapter 5, verse 8, where it says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walketh about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour."
Hypervigilance. Yes.
There you go. Yeah.
Like I remember thinking about that, like high control religions thrive on nervous system dysregulation. This feel like always being on guard, or even like the backsliding thing, right? You can't backslide, so you always have to be in action, moving forward. Which is, I mean, I can think of I have like this scenario or this scene in the back of my mind of I worked at the church, and we were required to, for those of us who worked there, we had to not only tithe with our paychecks, we had to tithe with our time as well. So in addition to my full-time, way overworking, but salaried, very little salary job, then I had to also make sure that I was volunteering another 8 to 10 hours a week on top of work at the church. Right. So, which is just like wild. Cause on a 40 to 50 hour work week, cause 50 hours, if you're salaried, that 10%, no, but then we were supposed to give out of our abundance. So it was 20%. Right. So it was like, that's where we got the extra like 8 to 10 hours. Right. And I remember not having the word for it, but just being so exhausted. And now I know I was like completely burnt out. But just like, being terrified that if I didn't do these things, like that was going to come back on me. Like I didn't have room to rest. Like that would have been seen as like a spiritual weakness, that I wasn't depending on God, that I wasn't trusting God to meet all of my needs, which is like basic needs, sleeping, which Jesus even did, but I had to be better than Jesus in that sense. Like sleep was not afforded to me. And I just think about how then that can be used as a mechanism of control and as a mechanism of shame and power over.
Also kind of thinking about like our nervous system, when we're in survival mode, like when sympathetic charge, like when we're in fight and flight, this is our body and organism trying to mobilize in the direction of getting us to safety, either fighting back against or fleeing from present danger. And when this danger is pervasive and invisible, escape is really, really difficult at best. And when threat isn't escapable, we go into collapse and shut down and freeze.
Yeah. And
so like there's a lot in this environment that sets us up to be kind of stuck in a state of freeze. Like what some of the ways that I see that are like the paralysis of like waiting for God to like reveal his will so that we don't make the wrong decision, and people being stuck in like this state of inaction because I can't make the wrong decision, but I have no way to know what the right direction is. And I also noticed like with queer folks, like there's this like way that the threat is embedded and also not escapable. Like
Yeah.
I'm the problem. It's me.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And also like I guess even more generally than that, like if we're, you know, leaning in the direction of Calvinism, this utter depravity, like the problem is inherent. It's not
Mhm.
escapable.
This whole conversation has made it like so evident why engaging with the nervous system is important for healing trauma, but religious trauma as well. But I'm curious, like, specifically, what are ways that engaging this nervous system really are so what makes it so important in the context of religious trauma and healing from
Yeah.
high control religion specifically?
Yeah. So connection's not available when we're not safe.
Mhm.
And so just for like on a fundamental human to human level, this connection's like one of our like absolute necessary requirements. And when we're in high reactivity all of the time, or when that reactivity gets triggered really easily by situations that really don't match, our nervous system response, um, it really it makes it difficult to be able to develop the kinds of connection that we need. Um, it also makes it really difficult for us to actually think well. When
Mhm.
we're in reactivity, we lose access to prefrontal cortex, this front part of our brain here that we need to have online to be able to think critically, to consider options, to think flexibly.
Mhm.
Um, and this goes offline really quickly when we're in threat. Like if I'm on the train tracks and a train's
Mhm.
speeding towards me, I'm like, what are my options here? What might I like to do?
Yeah.
This isn't what I need. I need to just flee is what needs to happen.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when we're kind of chronically activated, it makes it difficult for us to think well, to be able to think about ourselves relationally,
Mhm.
to think about others as safe, experience others as safe.
Yeah. Yeah, safe even when they're different than us too.
And I think that it makes it difficult for us to distinguish between discomfort and unsafety. Like we
Yes.
respond to discomfort as if we're in literal mortal danger when,
Mhm.
oh, turns out I just don't like a thing. But
Yeah.
but 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 this is also completely fine. I don't have to like, X. But that does me not liking this does isn't me about to perish.
That's such a good differentiator. Could you come to social media and say that?
That is
Oh
such
But
a
man.
that
I
is such
also think
a big
though,
one.
I think that we even in the direction of like rest, there's a distinguisher that I think is important to being able to distinguish between shutdown and actual restorative rest. Like the pause
Mm,
from effort, there's a lot of one of the things that I see is that people don't know the difference between, well, I'm not working, so this must be me resting. But this could also be me in
mm,
freeze, me in
mm.
shutdown, me in collapse. Both of them look like inaction, but one of them is not actually, my battery's not being recharged. And so, like having some understanding about that,
Yeah.
the calmer looking presentations of our nervous system, being able to distinguish between, oh, am I actually recharging or is this me in shutdown right now?
Mm. What do you think some of the cues would be that people could look for when we talk about like, am I resting or am I in shutdown?
Yeah.
Am I uncomfortable or am I unsafe? Kind of helping to differentiate some of
Well, I
that.
think that there's like being able to slow down
Mm,
and read some of our own cues, like
mhm,
reconnecting back to our bodies and what our body, like having a more attuned really relationship with our bodies and what's happening there,
mhm,
and being able to like orient around into our space and to notice, oh, this is where I am right now. And um I have lots of cues of safety right now. uh,
mm,
my I'm in a house that's with my doors closed. This is a really nice boundary. I feel grounded, I feel present, and yeah, physical safety is available, and being able to take in what safety is available is a really important thing for being able to distinguish between like, am I in threat or discomfort?
Mm.
I also think
Yeah.
like the development of being able to be more connected with what safety cues feel like is important. Like when people are uncomfortable, they can get super granular about what this experience is like. When they're anxious, they know that their heart's racing, that that they can't breathe, that their pulse is throbbing, and tunnel vision, sweating, whatever it is. There's lots of language and descriptors available in this direction of unpleasant.
Mm.
Yeah.
And if they're fine, then they're fine. And there's like very short descriptions and not a lot of connected description. And so this is one of the ways that I kind of one of the pathways that I think is especially important to start to build up is what lets you know when you're safe, when you're at ease, when you are comfortable.
Yeah.
What lets you know that? And being able to like build out some more vocabulary and awareness and descriptors in that direction, because we don't tend to be very connected with what that feels like. We think about that as, well, that's not, this unpleasant isn't present, so this must be that, I'm good.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That makes me think of just the whole concept of glimmers, like in polyvagal theory.
Yes,
Like
yes.
putting intention into being aware of that. Like it's still
Mhm.
like a type of nervous system activation, just not a stress
Yes.
response. But like
Yes.
the other is just as important.
Yeah. And when we think about like our nervous system, all of, the safe, social, connected, primed for action, and shut down, all of the, we kind of think of these in categories, but when our nervous system is working well, all of those are like working well together, like dorsal, sympathetic, and ventral. These are all working together well. And it's not that we don't have any dorsal or sympathetic activation. We have enough for those are all working well together. Like I think of a 3-channel mixer. We're in Nashville and thinking about these channels.
Yeah.
We want a more cohesive mix rather than like, one being all the way up. And so really being able to connect with what brings more of this ventral or, that safe, social, connected, what brings more of that online, and having access to what that feels like, what lets us know when we're there. This part of the nervous system experience feels really kind of important to develop more awareness around. We're very familiar with dysregulation, less so with regulation and ease and all of that.
Yeah. I think it's always important for me to share with my clients too, like your body does know how to do this. Like we are intrinsically wired to do this. And so it's not that we're having to learn necessarily brand new skills. It's like we're taking off the things that high control religion or cult or fundamentalism put onto us to try to dampen all of that. And I think that can be so empowering to people to see it. Like I literally do have everything inside me to heal and to come to a space of regulation. It's just reconnecting with that so that those pathways are firing together, which is so important.
I sort of describe this as I'm not installing something that you don't already have. And also, I'm not trying to shut off your threat cues. Like you absolutely need them for the times when you're absolutely not safe. We need to be able to, but we need to be able to experience all of that with more in ways that really match the environments and situations and relationships that we're in.
Yeah.
I love the metaphor of that you're not installing. It makes me think, I do a ton of IFS parts work, and that makes me think of the idea of core self. And like I'm always telling folks, like we're not growing or creating or cultivating something that does not already inherently exist. Like it already inherently exists within you. Like you are inherently good, but that so flies in the face of programming from high control religions, regardless of denomination. Like that is one common denominator that I see folks dealing with.
Yeah. So I know that, we've talked about this on various episodes before, but high control religion, fundamentalism, it really requires us to have this externalized view of safety, to, have other people that we're looking around to tell us that we're good, we're okay, we're safe, all these things. And so much of what we do is helping our clients find that within themselves. And that's not to say that like we just need to put ourselves in dangerous situations because now I know how to feel safe inside myself. Of course, we like external safety as well. And it's great when people are, helping us along. But I wonder if we can just talk a little bit about that concept, like how high controls really do require that external focus and why it's so important to bring that sense of internalized safety back online for the process of resolving trauma.
I think about how our relationship with ourselves and our physicality, that relationship is kind of actively underdeveloped.
Hmm.
And this is where we sense into safety and danger, and redeveloping or cultivating more of a wise relationship with ourselves, being able to trust, well, being able to listen to maybe from the very beginning what's happening here,
Mm.
and attuning to what's happening there, connecting with that, and learning how to, um, I mean, it's almost like learning a language, learning how to interpret the cues and knowing what is it that I'm even paying attention to? How do I pay
Mhm.
attention to myself well? And what do I do with the information that I get once I start paying attention to that? How do I interact with that?
Mm.
How do I make
Mhm.
decisions from that? Um,
Yeah.
and because that's happening often out of awareness, that body is sending signals and we're reacting,
Mhm.
but we're kind of trying to create some space between that stimulus and response so that there is opportunity for some um, thoughtfulness, some wisdom, some choice to be able to happen between something's happening
Mhm.
and I don't need to react right this minute, like especially in the instances where I don't need to react right this minute,
Mhm.
um, and kind of being able to sit with, listen to, and make wise choices about how do I want to act with everything
Mhm.
that I have, with all of the information that I have available right now.
So essentially, it lets you have choice.
Yeah, it lets us have
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
And I can make decisions based on like my relationship with this organism and everything that I all of this whole body of knowledge that I have, rather than having
Mhm.
to outsource that to,
Yeah. Yeah.
my environment or somebody who's in authority or in charge. I
Mhm.
can trust myself as a source of wisdom also.
I don't even know if this is a question, but it just really just shows, we touched on this earlier, but the importance of like that internal locus of control, whereas high control religion is doing the opposite,
Hmm.
Mhm.
externalizing that locus of control. So for someone who's like just starting out,
Hmm.
you've come out of high control religion, or maybe you're not even out of it yet, but
Hmm.
you're realizing this is not serving me. This is not healthy. There's something's wrong.
Hmm.
What are some first steps you would like? What are some things you would suggest to somebody when it comes to like being able to start working with your nervous system, being able to
Mm.
start
Hmm.
feeling safe, if safety is something that frankly you've never really felt?
I usually don't start with feeling safety.
Hmm.
I start with, like, grounding and orienting are the two like basic things that I usually start with most people. And grounding is just feeling your relationship to gravity,
Mm.
your connection with that you're planted on the ground, that
Mm.
or whatever surface you're sitting on or lying on, that you can feel like that weightedness and that just being physically present there. And then orienting, we're just connecting to the environment with our senses. What do I notice? I notice, birds chirping out there. Whatever it is that I can see, hear, smell, taste, touch. And then starting to move into tracking, like what do I start to notice inside?
Mm. Mhm.
And just noticing. Like, I don't care what it is that you're noticing. If what I'm noticing right now is that, there's a pile of mail on the floor next to me, or there is, dust on, that surface over there, or whatever it is, I'm just noticing. I'm not looking for anything profound.
Mm.
Checking inside, I'm noticing that my breath feels pretty easy right now. I'm also noticing that I'm not very comfortable in my chair right now. And I can do something about that. Um, and I notice just a little bit of tension behind, in the back of my head. I'm just noticing and describing. I'm not making up any story about it yet. I'm not
Mm.
coming up with an explanation for why it's there. All I'm doing is noticing and just starting to develop um, my ability to pay attention to myself in this way.
Mm.
Not even worrying about what to do about with what it is that I find. It's
Mhm.
almost like when I was in undergrad, I was an art major, and so like in my painting class, we're just learning how to color, like we're just learning color, learning the color wheel in a way. And then starting to learn how does color interact. I'm not even making a painting yet, but I'm just learning kind of what is some of the
Mm.
very, very specific qualities of my own direct experience right now.
Mm. Yeah.
That's where I would start, because it's a
Yeah.
relationship that's really underdeveloped for lots of us, not just in high control religion, but culturally. I mean,
Hmm.
culturally, we're sort of heads on sticks, and
Hmm.
everything below our neck is just a brain transport device. Um, the kinds of wisdom that we trust most is what happens in our head, and everything neck down is kind of deprioritized, as less important.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so just starting to develop a little bit of relationship with that.
Yeah. I love that
Yeah.
because it feels so tangible. Like I can do that, right? Like I can notice my surroundings. I can,
Mhm.
even if I'm like picking a
Yeah.
color and just noticing all the things that are that color,
Mhm.
those are manageable
Yeah.
things that somebody can do,
Yeah.
which is so important.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm drinking a cup of coffee. I have this cup of coffee. The mug itself has texture. It has
Yeah.
weight. When I
Mhm.
drink it, I notice that it's gone cold. And I
Yeah.
also notice the taste of it. And I notice what
Mm.
that feels like when I swallow it.
Mm.
Not profound. It's just noticing.
Yeah. It's not profound, but it also is like extremely profound when you've been so disconnected. And all of a
Yes.
sudden you find,
Yes.
oh, I've been doing, I've used this example before, but when I started like paying attention to like how food tasted, for
Uh-huh.
example, um, and I used to restrict eating Cadbury eggs because I thought, oh, they're so unhealthy. They're full of sugar, they're whatever. So I
Uh-huh.
would only let myself have one every year, right? And I would just scarf it down. And as I was learning how to pay attention, I went and I got 3 Cadbury eggs. I was like, okay, I can, I'm gonna do this and I can have as many as I want, but I'm gonna like pay attention while I'm doing it. And I did. And I was like, these are the most disgusting things I have ever tasted in my whole entire life. But because I have been so restrictive and not paying attention and just
Uh-huh.
assuming that I shouldn't do this because it's quote unquote bad, I have eaten this trash, and I'm happy to say I've never craved Cadbury eggs since that point. And that was over a decade ago. But it's
Yeah.
that profound profundity of like how many other things am I doing? Am I tasting? Am I engaging with? That I'm literally not even paying attention. And if I did, the experience I would have or would want to have would be very different than what is currently happening.
Yeah. And by not profound, what I was meaning more is that
Oh, yeah. Simple.
I'm not making meaning out
Yeah.
of what
Hmm.
I'm finding, or only paying
Hmm.
attention to thing experience that feels meaningful.
Yeah.
I'm just noticing what it is that
Yeah.
I'm noticing.
I love that. I love
One
it.
of the things that I've noticed and why I kind of lean in that direction is that when I ask people what they're noticing, there is this
Mhm.
sense that kind of automatically pops up that, oh, you're looking for something specific. I'm me practitioner. I'm asking for something specific. So,
Mm.
like you don't mean that for me to notice that, um, I'm gassy, for example, or that,
Mm.
um, my lips feel chapped or something like that. You're asking me to like, notice like, this deep, like specific memory that's connected with dot dot dot. And no, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm just curious, what do you notice when you pay attention?
Yeah.
Mm. I love that.
Yeah. I've noticed, I think, and this is both from my own personal life journey, whatever, going to my own therapy and doing my own work too, where it's like there is something so profoundly simple, but about just becoming in touch with what you're feeling in your own body, because
Mhm.
so much of the time, and I know this has been true for me, it's easy to want to stay in your head, keep it cerebral, keep it
Mm.
cognitive.
Mhm.
And one thing so I'm curious, I'll put the question first, but like, I'm curious how often you see this just in general as an experience with folks, because I know for me, it was a thing where I was consuming all the resources about trauma healing, but it was like so cognitive. It was almost like that was becoming a placeholder for actually doing the work of ever feeling anything in my body. And that
Yeah.
was, I mean, I'll raise my hand,
Yeah.
like that was me 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Jeremy, raise your hand too. I know
Yeah,
that was you.
I would,
Calling you out. It was
I would
all of
love,
us.
I would love it if I had no idea what you were talking about. Comma, however.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that I could read my way into this, hence, that
Yeah.
bookcase, that other bookcase, the other bookcases in the room over there and the bookcases over in that room. Like,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like it
Yeah.
was almost like that meme where it's like, I have the therapist who said, well, you have to, feel things to be able to heal them. And then like the meme response, me, an intellectual, and then all the books.
Yeah, exactly.
yes.
Uh,
Uh-huh. Thankfully, I have
I
friends, good therapist friends who point this out to me, but also,
yeah. Yeah, I think that's such a common thing. I really do. I was the same way. I remember when I first realized I had a body and that, my body was actually like the quote unquote key to healing. I was like, immediately what I did is I read 19 books on trauma in 1 month because I was like, this will do it. Turns
yeah,
out it didn't.
too much too fast
But
too
I would,
soon.
I had too much too fast too soon for sure. But yeah, I was like, yeah, I had all the books there. I had the
Mhm.
head knowledge, but it wasn't
Yep.
until
Mhm.
literally, not only did I realize I had a body, but I got into my body and understood the experience of living in my body and working from that place that any change happened. And gosh, I'm so glad it did.
Mhm.
Life is
But I mean,
totally
I think
different.
this is kind of one of those symptoms of like this larger cultural trauma where we're so disconnected from body that
Mhm.
we don't even know that this is a
Mm.
built-in available resource.
Yeah. It is the thing that will
It is
heal
the
you. Yeah.
thing that will heal
Yeah.
us. And we
Mhm.
we don't know this because all we're surrounded by is more ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and there's many other questions that I could ask you. I'm sure Andrew could ask you, but I guess the thing we'll kind of land on is there anything else that you want our audience to know before we let people know where they can find you?
Yeah. Actually, I mean, I guess that last thing that I just said, like trauma is a nervous system injury. And
Mm,
injury, if we think about this as injury, injury doesn't respond to better ideas.
mm,
Injury responds to being cared for well and including our
mhm.
bodies in this in this healing process, I think is especially important here as because better ideas aren't going to make me feel better about any of this.
Mhm.
My ideas are probably going to change about lots of things as healing happens, but those ideas aren't going to be necessarily the change agent.
Mm. So you're saying that that the concepts of change don't actually heal.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
couldn't resist. But yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Or the cognition
Yeah.
of change. Yeah. Yep.
I love it. I love it. Well, if you wouldn't mind sharing, are you taking clients? Where do you see people? Where can
Yep.
people find you if they're interested in knowing more about what you do or your work?
Sure. So I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and my practice is Thrivery. I'm sure that this will be in your show notes, but people can
Yes, we will make
contact me
sure to
there.
have all of that.
And I also do some coaching with Laura as well at CTRI.
Yeah.
So yeah, people can find me in either of those places. I also do, in addition to like working with clients, I also do like case consultation around, especially working with queer folks in like the Venn diagram between queer identity and like faith tradition of origin stuff like that
Mhm.
overlap. I work with a lot and I understand it like really deeply. And
Yeah.
the ways that trauma shows up there that are kind of unique, and some of the ways
Mhm.
that working with that is unique.
Well, because you are the man of many concepts, just kidding. I'm putting you on the spot. What is your current go-to resource or, book that you're reading that you're like, I got to share this with people?
Oh, my current go-to resource. Not a res. I just read Frank Anderson's biography.
Yeah.
He worked with Bessel van der Kolk and Dick Schwartz. He's an IFS guy.
Hmm.
He's also a gay guy and
Hmm.
grew up very Catholic. But like his biography I just read, and it's just a really, really, really um, beautiful story
Yeah.
and narrative. Yeah.
Awesome. Do you
I'll need
remember
to
the
check
name
that
of
out.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do I remember?
I know. I looked it up and
To be loved.
there we go. Yes. If you're watching the YouTube version, you can see it. To Be
Yeah.
Loved by Frank Anderson. I love his work so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
I didn't know there was a biography. Like
It
I've really
just
appreciated him and I've done trainings virtual with him
yeah.
and such. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it
that's
came
awesome.
out I think like a month or so ago. So it's
Yeah.
very, very
Okay.
new.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I love it. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a great conversation, and you are now our professor emeritus here on Sunday School Dropouts.
Emeritus, that's exciting. Ooh, does that mean I get a better offer?
Yes, you'll get a better satellite office. We'll pick a different booth.
And
Yes.
not on the karaoke nights.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the place we go to is very loud and very awful karaoke.
Oh my God.
It's always great being here and talking with you, Laura.
Yeah.
And it was great
Yeah.
talking with you too, Andrew.
Yeah, it was nice to finally meet you.
Yes,
virtually,
finally.
but yeah.
Finally.
Thank you again to Jeremy Lehmann for being our guest on this episode. Gosh, I'm like still letting it kind of sink in. I mean, I know we talk about this nervous system stuff all the time, but I feel like every time I talk about the nervous system and trauma and how it shows up in high control religion, I always am like, oh, there's this thing too. I don't know. What did you think of the episode?
Yeah. I loved it. I mean, it was great talking with Jeremy. It was great for me to finally be able to actually talk directly with him. Like, it's just great being able to, have conversations like this. And I think the thing that struck me most, which I feel like it always does when I really sit down and talk about trauma with another practitioner, but he explains things so simply and so well. It's just how simple it is. Like healing trauma. It's like, I know that for many years, I kind of, even as a clinician, kind of got in that, reading all the books and looking for those profound breakthroughs. And I think the thing that is profound about trauma healing is how actually simple it truly can be. It is really like going back to basics. It's just for a lot of us from high control religions, high control systems, that the basic was something that never happened. That just noticing your body,
Yeah,
so.
I know, and maybe this sounds like, I don't know, I was going to say the word crude, but like, if we look at it from an animalistic perspective, like how animals do things, it's like they just, obviously their prefrontal cortex of their brain is not developed. So this is why they can do it. But it's just like they tune into their body and release that energy instantaneously, and then they go about their way, and they're not constantly scared all the time. They're not constantly hyper vigilant looking for all this stuff because they don't have that trauma energy stuck in their bodies. And obviously it's amazing as human beings that we do have a developed prefrontal cortex, right? It is what makes us different than animals, and it is what allows us to, thrive in this world. And yet that is often what gets in the way of our bodies just doing what they were trained to do, what they were created to do in terms of letting things roll through us. And I tell you what, the times, I will say, especially in the last probably 8 or so years, where I've really been doing this work, like this is my daily work that I do, the amount that just doesn't stick in me is so amazing. It's like, yes, things have happened. Scary situations have happened. Threatening situations have happened. Difficult, stressful, chaotic, crisis, all of that has happened. But when you let your body just kind of ride those natural waves of activation to a place of resolve, you're not carrying it with you all the time. It's not then coming out in all these sideways ways. My body is no longer paying the price for that. And there is just something so beautiful about that, and profound and simple all at the same time. And I love it.
But also just, I get, you can't overstate the impact it has when, so many of us were told that you can't trust your body and you're inherently broken.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Which is why I think this work is so important, because of the messages that we, the two of us, as well as so many of our listeners, have faced. We're, like we talked about, we're going back to what our body already knows, but it's just kind of taking that lens of high control religion off and being able to, not engage in all of that, and really just go towards our inherent goodness and what our inherent wisdom is in our bodies, which I love.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been a great episode. As a reminder, there are still 2 support groups that are about to launch at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, one of which is Andrew's group. So if you're interested in being in that, go ahead and reach out. And then we have a purity culture group that is starting tomorrow. So if you're listening to this the day that this episode is coming out, you still have time to register. Anything else, Andrew?
I don't think so. I feel like there was something else, but it must not have been that important. So I'll revisit that if it comes to mind. But no, I think we're good.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, then I think it's time to say all God's people said, Amen.